Thank you, computer voice. Now this meeting
Mm.
is being recorded because it's going to be uploaded to a YouTube channel, probably psychologyatwork.blog, so we can share and learn and all of that. So more people can benefit from this discussion. So as we start, we already had a few introductions, and as people are still joining, it'd be great to hear from our wonderful speakers. So it gives me a great pleasure to introduce I guess, we can call them the three musketeers of office design, because I don't have better anything yet to come to mind as far as metaphors. So Hani, Chris, and Giuseppe. So
Three amigos. How
three
about that
amigos,
one?
fantastic.
Yeah.
Let's go for three
Yeah.
amigos, but maybe musketeers are also amigos, but that's a different conversation. So, Giuseppe, considering you came up with three amigos, you're on. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, I was thinking about how to introduce myself. I am, I suppose, a workplace designer. I've been an architect and an interior designer, but workplace has always called me back, and I have been working around workplace for at least for the last 30 years or so. In various aspects of it, the aspect that interests me most is where it triggers something in people, hopefully a positive reaction, but generally has an impact. So I think to Natasha's original point, being impactful in design, you'd think is what all designers aspire to. But in reality, a lot of design is born from a desire to express oneself. So it's not about it, the impact is only registered in as a response, as a response to one's work for most designers. For me, it's always been about seeing a positive effect on what people do within the workplace. The thing I love most is to come back to a project, a building, an interior, a year or two later, tour around and find out how it's changed and how people have changed it. And often there are some really interesting surprises and things that you wish you'd thought of have happened. So I think that's about me.
Excellent.
Is that, yeah.
Thank you, Giuseppe. So we can definitely explore how people can be triggered in a positive way, but sometimes also in a negative way. And what can we do about it? And what can we do it on a budget? So perfect. Thank you for that,
Budget.
Giuseppe. Chris, over to you.
Thanks, Nikita. My name is Christopher Allen. I run a business consultancy called Monrock Consulting. We do a lot of strategy and change work, all from the right hand from leadership development and all the way over to real estate strategy, including design. I'm not a designer. I am a classic management consultant. I spent 20 years in the military, and I've spent the last almost 15 years doing consulting work predominantly in the real estate environment. And in fact, my first job when I left the military many years ago was with Giuseppe in a team. So it was wonderful to get to learn from him. We work on the premise, we have this little tagline, which is live, work better. Which is all about people. So everything we do is leadership focused. It's all about how people interact with the environment rather than how the environment interacts with people. And we believe that great offices don't build great cultures, great leaders do, and that design follows leadership, not the other way around.
Talking about following and leadership and what kind of leaders we want. And what they will say in their infinite wisdom, flying on private jet and then saying all office workers need to be in the office 5 days a week.
Yes. That's business for you.
I know, right? So thank you for that, Chris. And we'll definitely touch upon what business leadership and how we can lead an office design during the session. And Hani, over to you. You seem to have a book next to you. Can you also mention that?
Well, thank you, Nikita. Well, I'll come on to the book, but just as a quick introduction, although now I'm heavily in behavior science and IO psychology, that's not where I started life. Born to it into physics and engineering. Interestingly enough, also ended up flying as an airline pilot for many, many years. But having finished my degree, I also acquired the airline transport pilot's license. Worked for 3 airlines, actually. And as all pilots do, try and get as quickly as they can to their command course and become a captain. I achieved that, but decided to leave. And they all thought I was obviously mad, or I've had something odd to eat the day before. But I got very inspired by human, as they call it actually, in the human limitations, human performance and limitations. I was more excited about human performance than limitations, really. But I left that to do what later became the largest behavioral study ever known to mankind to understand how it drives culture. And it was a behavioral study. If you are excited, this is where the book comes in, having gone commercial and produced several products to really help enhance culture. And it's all about culture. This is the exciting bit, about the people and the place. So the place, obviously, there's a lot of environmental design that comes into it, which I'd love to talk to you about today as well. But the book does summarize a lot of my findings, in particular case studies which came out of real life. And it talks about culture analytics because I do try and seek out real data analytics and behavior science to really understand and articulate culture, again, about the people and the place. One thing I did do, which I hopefully will share with you a little bit later, is during my time while I was back at university studying psychology, I did get involved into Airbus for cockpit design, and it was all about driving and improving human performance. So you can imagine there how critical that is to analyze data, to feel comfortable, relax. Imagine if you're a pilot, you sat sometimes for hours on end into a small cockpit, and if things do start going haywire a little bit, environment and design around you could have a huge impact, believe it or not, as I found. There was 3 psychologists working with them. I was known as Psych 3, by the way. So yeah, great fun to see all those designs take place in the 350 and Airbus 380, which are obviously the newest aircraft flying now. So yeah, happy to be here, share all that with you a little bit later.
Excellent. Thank you so much, everyone. So the way that the format is going to go is quite informal. So each speaker will have about 5 to 10 minutes to state their position on the topic. Then we'll have a little discussion. Then we'll have a Q&A with what you want to know and the questions you have. And then we'll wrap it up. So about strap in for the next 20 minutes. When our speakers have a go, also feel free to ask questions. And then we'll go into a more informal discussion. And maybe even there's going to be a cheeky breakout room, but I'm not sure about this at this point. But considering we organize the session, and I'm going to be completely selfish, and I'm going to go with the first because I love aviation psychology. There's actually a whole body of it. You know, if you want to really geeky, there's whole aviation psychology bodies. And Hani, I'm just fascinated with your experience designing cockpits for Airbus. What do you feel that, you know, a cockpit you really people miss out in office design, what you're very much aware when it comes to aviation psychology and cockpit design?
That's a really hefty question. I'll try my best to address it as much as I can. We could run a whole design workshop on this, but you can just imagine in a cockpit, first things first. And particularly, there are different, flights may happen in different times of days, different conditions. One thing you got to think about: how do you create the right environment, the right? I mean, my approach to this is called, by the way, time and space. It's the space around you and the time that you have spent there, and the time information is presented to you. So it's got to be comfortable in different aspects, different time of days. It's got to be large enough yet compact enough. And you've got to have around you, since you are being bombarded with so much information in the flight deck, organizing the environment in such a way that it's giving you the right data at the right time with the right color cues, the right information, and even the sound of the oral warnings, so you can start understanding what things actually are just a quick info or something that you need attention or something that is obviously, okay, we do need to deal with. But if you just think with the amount of data flow, the color, the information, the ambient lighting, especially at night, the amount of air and air circulation that's coming into the flight deck, believe you me, all of this is affecting human performance, is affecting us as people. And you can sit sometimes in a flight deck for long haul for hours and hours and hours. And if you think about the competencies that each pilot must bring in, one of them is around situational awareness, which you got to have all the time. That can drop off if it's stuffy in there, if the lighting isn't right. Just imagine how much this could affect you. all of those need to be designed in such a way to help. That's what I mean by the place. The place has got to help us articulate data, drive competencies or supercharge competencies that we need, but also manage our behaviors in the flight deck. It's not just all about what we call stick and rudder. All of those things failed us in the past. If I take you back just 30, 40 years, where the pilot may have not even been in the flight deck, they'd be stuck on top of it, wearing great big goggles that's not even covered, passenger all covered, and having to struggle through all that just to fly. You think it was madness, like we were asking for trouble. And incidents used to happen, as you might imagine. Obviously, luckily, those incidents have been vastly reduced, but still, we do get a lot around. In fact, the machines have gotten so much better. We still get some issues around pilots doing things that they shouldn't be doing, perhaps. But sadly, some of it could be down to design. I would still argue, I don't want to keep blaming the people. Actually, we could help by doing fine-tuning, extra design around the space, the environment, the way that they reach the instruments, the way that they get to see the data in a timely manner. Probably with Airbus methodology, you get to see what you need to see when you need to see it. Was a brilliant thing to do. Which arguably I think has worked really well and now vastly improved, but could still do with a little bit more. So yeah, huge. I mean, if you're excited about space and time design from an IO psychology point of view, that is your field. It's just great fun to think about that and how critical it is to drive us as people.
Yeah, ergonomics. Perfect. Thank you, Hani. And what's your position on culture analytics, office design? What would you like people to know based on your real world experience, be it Airbus, working at companies, flying airplanes, designing culture analytics, behavioral science? What do you think people miss?
Yeah. So I would argue we're missing, I'm going to be controversial a little bit. Apologies to everybody here. I think we're missing even the basics, which is really annoying because a lot of the time we spend when we are creating organizations or on system design, accounting design, this design, that design, very rarely we think about our culture design, or what I now call culture by design, which I do address heavily in the book. And culture by design must include the place. If we know what behaviors, if we've done culture analytics, i.e. linking behaviors to outcomes, which is, again, something I'll talk a lot about, and you know what behaviors need to be present at the place and for the people. So how do we change that into an environmental design? I gave some really simple examples I remember in the book, which is really strange, where an organization knows that teamwork actually drives many great outcomes. In fact, they say it's absent. Right, we need to drive it. And I said, well, the very basic, having visited their offices and talked to a few people, how do you collaborate and work together? There is no space at all in the entire building that they can do that. Everyone's answer was, there's a Starbucks about half a mile away. We all go and sit there. Can you imagine where we're saying we need teams to work together? We need, we know it drives our positive outcomes. We have evidence of it. And yet there's no area, nothing at all that you could do that in. And furthermore, if you think about it, it's not just about creating a room. It's about creating a room with the right furniture that people can collaborate, with the right props, so to speak, that they can collaborate in, the right chairs, the invite a nice, maybe, coffee machine or whatever it might be, so that people can, stay there for a long time, work together. I mean, if you just think when we say about creating a room, it's not just about throwing any room open and just, throwing a few chairs together and hoping for the best. It's about how do you allow people to be in there for hours and want to work together, and all can collaborate, and you need to orchestrate how that might look like without all talking over each other, because that's never easy in a meeting. So just some of the basics, one other one which I loved, and I still share this today, I found where an organization wanted to create an environment that is really, as an example, respecting, if you like, the ecosystem that we live in, and recycling and footprint and all that. And it was fascinating to see that one of their biggest thing was, there was still paper-led somewhat, I know that has changed a lot, is where they would put actually their recycling. So it's funny, you talk to the leaders, say, hey, I'm doing it. I want to show everybody I'm doing my bit. And it's interesting that actually each leader would have recycling bin particularly and the shredder next to their office. But actually in a huge, somewhat open plan office, the only places you'd find those bin was next to leader closed offices. And I said to them, so they said, well, why isn't it happening? I do it. Look, I show people I'm doing it. I said, well, yeah, that's the problem, is that every cluster of desks need to have this within easy reach, because it's a constant driver reminder of it's there. People can go and shred, recycle or whatever. That's how, basic design. And I know people around this very great room that we're in today from around the world may laugh at it and say, what the hell? This is such basic rubbish. What is it on about? But I'm bringing you real stories that I actually talk about in the book in the sense of driving the behaviors that you want to see with basic designs is so easy, yet we're not doing the easy stuff. Now, obviously, some companies are doing great things, but
I couldn't agree more, Hani. Recently, there was a group of people and they wanted to work more across teams, but there was actually no rooms in their office big enough to fit more than one team. Like literally, they had this new office, spent a shed loads of money on it, and they literally didn't have a room big enough. And the big enough rooms had tables you couldn't move, which filled in whole space. So, when you look at them through the Zoom call, you can see them kind of like, sniggering just right next to the wall to take up a seat. It's like amazing.
What were they doing that they needed such a big space for so many people to collaborate in?
Well, they should have been collaborating, put it this way. They wanted to collaborate, but it was only like, the architecture didn't allow for this. And talking about props and design and architecture, Giuseppe, what are your thoughts on these topics?
I'm going to try and connect with what Hani said and use and touch on the word performance, because so there's performance in a cockpit, which is obviously targeted and focused and in a heightened state, you could argue. But take the other meaning of performance, which is in theatre, where you are as an actor of work, there are various moments throughout your working day, as they are, say, through a play. And those moments aren't of equal intensity. And there's a build up, there's a crescendo, there's a peak, there's a slow time, there's a start, there's a downtime, there's a finale. And that's actually more, and I think perhaps even in a cockpit environment, at some point you're out of the plane and you're still the pilot, but you're no longer you're still a pilot and you might be doing paperwork or whatever it is. And it's still work. So I'm thinking that an environment that's supportive of work as a performance, which has its slow starts, cup of coffee, or maybe fast starts, first meeting and team meeting first thing in the morning, and then moments of lull. I mean, let's face it, a lot of work is kind of waiting for stuff to happen. And I'm not saying people are lazy, but I'm saying it's not always full on. And then you have to ask yourself, how does a working environment cater for these moments? So that's one question. With what you mentioned, meeting rooms, variety of spaces, and as we know, the best workplace design has tried to offer that choice. But the other side of the equation is, how do you know what suits what you're doing, and what gets you to go and pick the place that will work for what you're doing at the given moment? So, I've done some work on the various types of meeting that exists, and some of them are informal, some of them are casual, some of them are decision meeting, very, very formal. Also, some of them need enclosure and privacy and acoustic, and some of them don't need any of that, and you want a connection to other teams. So how do you know which one to pick for what you're doing? And I think it goes to something that we were discussing on a call in preparation of this, Nikita, which is awareness of what you're doing and what would support what you're doing. And I think we all have, I think we all have places that we favor for certain things. I mean, the equivalent of the shower for, you know, having ideas, or some spot in your living room where you go and read a book. Things that the cats like have those kind of places, and we humans do too. And I think when it comes to the workplace, we forget about that awareness, and we forget to really look at what's around us and pick what works for us in terms of orientation, comfort. And I think if we did more of that, then there would be a better supported performance. Something just to finish, something that would validates what I'm saying comes from, you know that I'm interested in this, Nikita, from the world of healthcare, where patient recovery, there's a lot of clinical evidence that, you know, how the kind of lighting and air and color that you have around you would support recovery period for certain illnesses. Beyond that, I think I've designed a dementia care unit and where a lot of patients who have dementia do not have initially any clinical symptoms. What they are looking for is support from the environment they're in terms of two things, and I think they are also valid in office design. One is familiarity. You want things around you to feel like you know where they are. You want to know where the coffee machine is, where the coffee pods are, where the paper is, how to post a letter. All these things make you feel confident about the space you're in, and you feel you're in control. I imagine cockpit is very much like that too. You know where the switches are, or voice control or whatever. But then also, perhaps not so much in cockpit, is stimulus. You want the environment to wake you up, surprise you, do things. This is difficult for architecture to do because once you've built the project and it's been delivered to the design that it was meant to be, very few office managers, facility managers, HR directors are willing to kind of refresh it. Perhaps we should do that. Hotels do it every 5 years, at least there's a refresh. And I think that sense of stimulus is important for dementia patients because it keeps them in touch with seasons, with the time of the day, with memories, with the senses. So I think if I had to say two things I've said, one is awareness of your environment, and secondly, for your environment to make you feel both at the same time grounded, but also to be able to surprise you and stimulate you.
Excellent, fantastic. So considering we have discussed environment, stimuli, different times of day, we didn't cover yet, the more kind of human leadership element that Chris, you were alluding to in the beginning. So over to you.
I'm listening to a radio DJ, isn't it? Sort of segmenting from one record to another.
Oh, trust me, I did a talent show in Denver with 17 acts at a psychology conference. That took some flexing.
Well, I've seen you doing a stand-up, so it's brilliant. Okay, I'm going to pick up a little bit on what Giuseppe and Hani have said. And I really like the thing about theatre, Giuseppe. I'm going to come back to that in a moment. But for me, thinking about space in terms of how we interact with that, for me, as I said earlier, it's all about leadership. And leadership sets, in our tone, leadership sets the cultural weather, all right? So that sort of links to Hani's point there. And design follows suit. We consistently engage with clients and organizations who start with design and then say, oh, Chris, can you come and help us because we've got a cultural issue or we've got a leadership issue? And I say, yes, and part of that issue is the design you've just spent millions of pounds getting through. And it's not that it's a bad design, it's just that it lacks dialogue. And, that's one of my second points is design without dialogue is dangerous. If you don't actually talk to people, and that doesn't mean, by the way, just talking to the leaders. The leaders must be there to bridge the silos between the different teams and the different aspects. You've got to actually get people's take on things and record that in some, like Giuseppe said, in a surprising or fun way. You've got to get people engaged from the top to the bottom of an organization. And the third one is about fortitude. And fortitude for me is about when you're going through periods of uncertainty, perhaps it might be a workplace redesign or, cultural change or whatever it may be. Your leaders have got to hold the line on values. And for me, what that means is you've got to have values to start with. They've got to be designed by the people who are in the organization, and you've got to believe in them. And what we normally put, values on the wall, and what was the saying? Values are for living, not laminating. We put them on the wall and we engrave them into the stone in our office receptions. But it doesn't mean anything because we have no connection. It's just a big word, and it says you have to be courageous. Nikita, have you been courageous today? Oh yes, I've shown loads of courage in writing these emails. It doesn't mean anything. You've got to actually link it to activity and doing something. That's what leaders are there for. Okay, so they've got to make principled decisions, not just popular ones. That's what they're paid for. They're not managers that are managing process. The leaders are there to inspire and get things done, whether that's a workplace redesign, a culture, or whatever it may be. So how have we seen that? First of all, you've got to allow leaders. You guys trying to pick some.
Oh, rubbish, Chris. Sorry, I muted the wrong person. I muted you. Nothing personal. Just, yeah, over to you.
That's all right. No worries. What was I saying? Oh yeah, when we see this, we really see leaders not being able to deal with that pressured situation of making tricky decisions, and we often see them pushing those decision-making things down for offices, pushing them to consultants like me or designers, and being led rather than taking the lead. And you need both. So they've got to earn the trust, both with the people who are going to be using that space. And Natasha, you asked a brilliant question earlier about what do you do if you don't have money for an office design? And my answer to that is you don't need any money for office design. If you have money, it's absolutely wonderful. And that environment supports your resilience, supports the leadership that you've got, supports your mission and your values and your vision. But actually, you don't need anything. And look at startups, are a really good example of this. So many startups, including the biggest ones on the planet that we know about from Amazon and everybody else, they started with a makeshift desk made of a pallet in a garage, and off they went. They didn't have Gucci stuff in their office and loads of money. And as they scaled up, they didn't necessarily spend all their money on that. What they focused on was doing one thing brilliantly. That's about leadership and knowing your business, and the old paracetamol test. That's about having values and visions that you can stick to and actually do something with, and that everyone else who joins you wants to hang their hat on and say, I want to be part of that. I don't really care, this chair is broken right now. Maybe one day we'll get a gold-plated one and we're going to nick it from Blenheim Palace. It'd be amazing. But for now, I'm loving what I'm doing, and that makes up for all of that stuff, because if we are successful, we'll get the other trappings later, and then we should be careful that we don't get skill fade because we've just got all this stuff piled on. So the last 2 points are people are always center, but mission is first. But what you're trying to do must be the first thing that you focus on, because you're always focusing on the people. And building culture behind that creates trust and action in order to make those two things better. What was it I heard the other day? Culture isn't declared, it's demonstrated. Right? You've actually got to do something in order to make that culture come to life. And the culture dictates the design, not the other way around, in my opinion. Lastly, you do need people who have got that sort of systems and design thinking brain about them, right? They need to be able to balance precision, coordination, the terrain, the environment you're in order to come up with a really good example or a really good idea for where you want to live and work. It's not just about furniture and walls. It's about, how can I put this? It's about a platform for success. And that's what an office should be about. And in order to design that, you've got to go back to the basics and get people to talk to each other. You can't push that down the line.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's my pitch.
Yeah, that's great. I like the thinking about the notion of doing something with very little. There's a project that it occurred to me, reminded me of a project I did where I asked a group of people. I left the project unfinished, interior design, part of it was unfinished, and I asked the team that was going to occupy it to finish it themselves. They were given a couple of weekends and paint and various bits and pieces. They were asked what would they like to do. and it costs nothing to do that. But the and it goes back also to my point about awareness. The engagement in doing something and in the space itself broke down a barrier which I think exists, whereby workplace is considered as a tool, like a keyboard is. It's a piece of equipment that's put at your disposal that has nothing to do with you. It was there. You turned up. It's part of your contract that you should turn up there, and there it is, and it's got tables and chairs, and you didn't choose them. And even if you were asked to choose them, even then, in that dialogue, you think, well, I'm not a designer, and anyway, I don't care, and I might be somewhere else in 5 years' time. It's your choice. But actually, investing your thinking and your personality into a space, even by painting a wall, maybe it's the wall that nearest to you, or choosing a rug, or whatever it is, creates a connection, which is an emotional connection. Also, it makes it yours. So you feel like, and I like the thing that you say about dialogue. It reminds me of a project I did with McKinsey in Japan, where in Japan, leadership is bottom up. So the leader decides absolutely nothing unless everybody from the secretaries, porter, the delivery, the post person up have actually had a chance to comment and have an input, and they agree. And then you can take it to them. First question is, does everybody agree with this? Says yes. Oh, okay. Well, I don't like it. But no, that doesn't happen generally. But so I think dialogue is interesting in our Western culture, with the leader possibly still white male of a certain age. The decisions as a designer, I would say 90% of the projects I do, there's a core team, an exec, whatever they call it. And they very often the conversation is about, well, let's tell them later. Let's not have this dialogue right now, because having the dialogue means effort, means conversation, means that people need to choose. How do we get them to choose? Then they choose what if they choose the wrong thing, the thing that we wouldn't choose, And so actually, it takes, as a designer, the kind of skills that you do not learn in college or even professionally. And actually, probably personality-wise, most designers do not have that kind of and those antenna that allows to pick on. But I think the dialogue co-creation, of course, is very, should be the foundation stone of workplace design. And I like very good, Chris.
Thanks, Giuseppe. I know Hani's coming in there. I'll pick up on your theatre bit when I get a moment. Yeah, thanks.
Tempting. Okay, Hani, over to you.
Two quick things. Christopher, thank you so much. If for anybody in this room wasn't sure about what Christopher said, I haven't met him actually before, I haven't collaborated, but I hope Christopher will be happy that literally this book exactly validates every word you just said. Literally take a data approach to it to validate your golden words. So thank you so much. The second thing, I just want to make people laugh a little bit. Again, back from the aviation industry, just to pick up a Christopher point. Think about Boeing as a case study. For those of us who don't know how that culture has been toxic and caused literally planes to fall out the sky, you've been under a rock probably to go look at it. But something about the values design, which they never thought about, of how to make people, live those. And I kid you not, starts with safety, trust, transparency. Yeah, right. Well, you all know what's been going on there. In fact, it was the best transformation project in the last company, but sadly in the opposite direction of where they needed to be. So think they were those things, and just imagine if Bill Boeing was around today, what they would have to be telling somebody like Bill Boeing about the problems they're in, who was one of the best engineers who believed about people, collaboration, and driving safety and trust and innovation, completely away from that. How did he do that? They moved all the leaders away from where manufacturing used to happen. Manufacturing is northwest. They moved everybody to the east. It might as well have been a different continent. So just to segregate and disconnect them from really what happens, what's Boeing all about? Obviously, transparency is still a great thing to talk about because, as you know, their planes sadly are scaringly becoming transparent because the doors fall off in mid-flight, which is something that, well, is rather scary to say the least. So there you go. 4 words, 5 words which Boeing live by. And Christopher, do they actually enact and live any of those words now? I'll leave you to
No, thanks. They don't. You know, I've got some great friends working in Boeing, and we swap amusing stories on our messages every morning. A lot of ex-military people in there, and you know, there's a classic example of real lack of moral courage. And moral courage comes in many forms, right? But it comes in the form of being upstanding. That's how the Americans call it, right? The ability to actually say something that people might not like, but it's the right thing. You've got to actually stand by your values or your vision or your whatever it is that you're being led by. And many companies don't do that, either because the shareholders are pushing them or they're just not very competent, or other reasons that I would say are very personal. And I mean, you know, for me, it's personal to me. I want more money. I want more this. I want more title. And that's sad, but that is a bit of reality, and we bury our head in the sand. Without that moral courage, though, which goes back to your leadership point, the culture will fall apart. The processes will fall apart. And whatever it is you're either making or living in will follow suit.
Exactly. But there was other things. So we did a very fun talk at SIOP this year. It was called Organizational Culture, Similarities Between Cults and Organizations.
Yeah.
So, and there was, when we asked, just pair up with the person who here has witnessed cultish behavior in organizations, chat to the person next to you, and then we ask, show of hands, who witnessed cultish behavior in organizations. Everybody's hands went up. There was over 200 people in the room. It's like, ooh, we have something to talk about. I always say you cannot spell organizational culture without using the word cult, and there's a hint in it. So sometimes it's great when companies flies its values. And sometimes when company has engraved values, it's us or them, it can be not so great. And let's not forget also cults of personality of leaders. We had even a little competition. Who said this, a CEO or a cult leader? That went down a hoot. So yeah, so when we talk about cultures, there's also an angle of really strong cultures and will be beneficial or not. And to me, what's really interesting is great. We get some real world examples. I was just wondering, before we go to a Q&A with our wonderful audience here, I just wondered if speakers can share with us, without mentioning any names, or you can do an amalgamation of several, depends how neurotic and high on openness and slightly paranoid I'm feeling today. But if you can give us a time where you saw office design, culture, everything that's dear to your heart done right, and one time that it wasn't done right, and what do you feel made the difference? So just kind of couple examples. Yeah, if you'd be willing to share that.
Shall I go first? Oh, you go first.
No, go ahead,
No.
Giuseppe. Go ahead.
No, you go. You go.
Oh, so high on a
All right, I'll start on one that's done right, and that's innocent drinks. A few years back, the CEO at the time, Douglas Lamont, who's now the chief chocolatier at Tony's Chocolate, Douglas ran us up and he said, Chris, we want you to come and help us with our culture.
Was that before Coca-Cola?
Or Coca-Cola, yeah, before. And I said, well, that's interesting because, you know, everyone thinks innocent drinks got this amazing culture. You want us to come and help you do it. And he said, yeah, and at the same time, obviously, we want to make some amendments to the office in reflection of the culture that we need to, old sigmoid curve, yeah, taking a step up. What they did, to answer your questions, Giuseppe, is they engendered a way of working that people wanted to be there for. And don't get me wrong, COVID got in the way, and we've kept in touch with them about how that's gone. They've done pretty well. But they had there's a unique way of occupying that building that I have not seen in any other workplaces. Bearing in mind it's in Ladbroke Grove, so we're not talking, you know, great. People loved being there. The office fruit towers, it's brilliant. But when you walk in, you immediately feel it. It's not because you see it. You don't actually. It's not because someone tells you something. You feel this thing. You get a feeling when you walk in. And I don't know about you, but there aren't many offices when you walk in. If you do get a feeling, it's usually a bad one or a negative one. You certainly don't get that walking in thinking, wow, this is not just cool, but just, wow, I want to be here. And that's what Innocent was like.
Because I work with Coca-Cola after they took over Innocent and probably ruined that culture. And also, what's the other one? Monster.
Oh, yeah, Mondelez.
No, that other drink, a cool drink that they also bought. Is it called Monster?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, they ruined that. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Danny. Monster. And that's because they kind of took, the view that it's all really Coca-Cola and so on and so forth. Sorry, I forgot what I was going to say. No, leave it. Actually, I'll jump in and tell you my anecdote, which is working with McKinsey for a long time. So a company that, as you'd imagine, management consultant, pretty analytical. And you'd think, therefore, they are rather rigid, perhaps, in their way of interpreting or providing a workplace design brief and taking you through the dialogue that we said is really useful. In actual fact, they apply what they do with their client, which is they gather the data, look at the patterns, ignore most of it, and come up with a out of left field kind of solution. I'm kind of simplifying, and that works really well in design. And one of the things that we did as a project, which worked particularly well, involved the way you do the project and you create that dialogue. And it had to do with a transition from, this is many years ago, from a transition from mostly enclosed office space environment to shared environment. So big change, especially one that touches on management consultants, turf territory rooms, so that they used to be given a multi-thousand-dollar budget to choose their furniture. So all of that goes, change. And the way we together created a model was to by introducing pilots, a whole series of pilots where you'd have volunteers spending 6 months at a time. So you'd have to start really early, 6 months at a time, giving feedback to a person who was there, which we call the concierge. And that over a number of pilots helped to refine the design, tweak, adapt, revise. And instead of using the traditional, I mean, the construction industry, guys, is also to blame in this super conservative, super dinosaur kind of industry where, you work in a linear fashion. You got the design, the engineering, the delivery, snags, end of contract, lawsuit, in some cases, and not ever for me, but actually, by working through a pilot, you're actually introducing a soft conversational element into design that allows you to circle over what starts as a concept that actually gets built in part, gets adapted, gets costed, gets revised. And to Natasha's point, it doesn't need to cost very much because you don't actually have to build the real thing. You're building an approximation. And to my earlier point about engagement, people feel they've really contributed because they were there. They were in the space that was created, and the outcome was tangible. It wasn't on a drawing, it wasn't in a rendering, it wasn't a computer animated thing. It was real, and it touched on all sorts of things, like say storage of personal belongings in an office. It's just a huge topic. You could spend months discussing it. Is it part of happiness? Probably. Where your stuff is really does matter. Is it in your pedestal and they're disappearing fast in the bottom drawer that's supposed to have the hanging files that don't exist anymore? It's got your gym shoes, your bag, all the various things. So if all of that goes because of shared desking, which he has, then it goes in a locker. How do you access the locker? Do you use a key? How big is it? Is it different sizes? Are there guest lockers, etc.? Are they aerated? Are they? Because they get smelly. Are there some I've seen can be refrigerated for the lunchbox that you bring in? I mean, it's a huge topic. So in a pilot, you're able to pull at those threads and have those conversations, and without somebody saying, "Oh, it's too late, we've ordered it," or "It's built," or we've decided, "Oh, we can't afford that possibly." No, anything goes. It's a pilot, it's a mock-up, it's a conversation. So I've enjoyed doing that with them, and in the end, you ended up with something that was quite different, but you accompanied it all the way. I think the best thing a designer can be is rather, I mean, and talking about cult, most design studios are cult organizations, and so and a lot of them are built around identities, you know. So the best thing that a designer can be less of a cult leader and more of a shepherd or a steward or somebody who just brings people along, is curious about what they've got to say. So really, oh, okay, well yeah, why not? Just mix that with that and see what happens. Which obviously goes against the instinct to want to control everything. And in a sense, I think that's, for me, after, you know, I started as an architect in '85. So this year is my Foster's. I joined Foster's in September '85. So soon, 40 years of being an architect. Thank you. And, you know, I think that is what you learn as an architect. What I've enjoyed as an architect is a surprise that comes from letting people, opening your door to their ideas and trying to work with everybody's ideas and bring it together without losing any originality or intensity or anything like that. If you're worried about that, then then you have a crisis of confidence. You should do something else. I think managing all of those ideas is what's important.
Excellent. And considering managing pilots and shepherding those ideas into fruition and involving people and getting involved, considered pilots were mentioned. I cannot resist. Hani, last but not least, what kind of your brilliant story of something done right or something not so great?
Actually, it's a simple story from a fintech organization that started up many years ago, providing a really quite interesting concept around payment systems. And it was a brilliant story of how they went from a nothing to being a multi-billion sort of dollar organization. Along the way, they kind of lost maybe the mojo a little bit, in the sense of being always working together. They were all working out of one room. It was all open plan. Everybody collaborated. If you wanted quiet time, there was one place you could go to, but really, essentially, it was all driven together. And obviously, as they've grown, the walls come up, leaders start behind, glass-doored offices, whatever. People stopped knowing what's going on, really didn't open up transparency. So very simply, redesigned the environment to have no offices. Everybody, leader, non-leader, they all work in open plan. We redesigned it that there are quiet areas for people who needed to do quiet work. They could go in there. There's still multiple desks, but they could go there for quiet areas where conference calls could happen. And then redesigned some of the team collaborations. They tend to work not maybe in large team designs, but smaller, maybe 5, 6, up to 10 people together at any one point to collaborate for certain product designs and web designs and so on. And because of the way they needed to work together, the best thing you could do was actually having a circular room with the ability to do a lot of stand-up thinking, and on big monitors that you could draw on stuff, and you could superimpose it with if you like, data from your PC. So everybody could actually, the huddle, they didn't need to huddle on a table. They need to huddle around the big screen that they could draw on, bring in live data on, whatever. And it just transformed. We went from product design to delivery that took 6 months. Product design to delivery started taking 1 month.
Wow. That
Okay.
is quite a difference.
What did I just tell you? I didn't spend a lot of money. In fact, I tore down walls, redesigned circular areas for teamwork. Okay, costed something, but we're talking peanuts. A product not being launched that could make you money in 6 months down to 1 month, you paid it back in one product. None of this is expensive. Leave it at that.
Nice. None of this is expensive. It's quite common sense, but the issue is that common sense is not that common. So, and on that wonderful note, given rounded discussions, I'd like to open this up to our wonderful audience here and participants. What questions do you have for the speakers, for each other? Feel free to either unmute or pop your comments into the comments. Completely up to you. And in no particular order, Lowry, considering you have your camera on and you're sitting in the office, clearly, just what are your thoughts? What are your questions?
Hello, everyone. Sorry, I did come a little bit late. I was out of a meeting. But I think with what you've been saying, I have worked in spaces that don't exactly foster the right kind of culture or even a thinking environment and a thinking space. On the previous call with Hani, I also work in aviation, so I know sometimes the way, for example, flight deck or an air on the aircraft, a working space is set up. The ergonomics that's gone into that, I think, is very important. That could be included in an office space as well. And I can't remember, somebody mentioned Japan. Some of the designs in Japanese offices, I've seen that on trips to Japan when I've been cabin crew. And that's really interested me about how different people do things and how different people lay out spaces. I would guess the question I have, because I came in late and I missed a bit, is there a text or maybe a person that you'd all recommend going to look at or read to learn more about this, to get a head start on this field?
I'm going to answer, but I'm going to ask Giuseppe to help me with my answer, because there was a book written a long time ago, Giuseppe, and you'll know it better than me, by Frank Duffy.
Yes.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but Frank was one of these sort of pivotal workplace people, designers, architects.
Yeah, it is a very, very old book, probably still very relevant.
It really is, and this is my point, right? And to your question there, Laurie.
Yeah.
That book by Frank Duffy, if you read some of the stuff in there, yeah, there's loads of stuff in there that's outdated. Wow, he talks about, I mean, it's 2025.
There are several books. As Work in the City is one. The New Office, Changing Workplace. But these are not the ones I'm thinking of. Yeah, The Changing Workplace would be the main one. But it's interesting that that you mentioned Frank Duffy, because he is from an era where workplace design, there were ideas about workplace design in the sense, but ideas that were prescriptive in a sense. I mean, there was a template, a model, the idea of, and barriers to break down. One of the early projects I remember when joining Foster's was the Willis Faber Dumas Insurance Company. I don't know whether this is a building that it's now a listed building. It's basically the very first open plan insurance company building with managers not in an office, and this is late 1970s, so very much. And it was inspired by some of Frank Duffy's work. I think nowadays the conversation is more about is kind of anything goes. There are many more voices about what workplace should do and should be. And also, I think, and this is us being together on this call is a testament to that. These voices are not from one field, it's multi-actor, so to speak. So psychology, I mean, I suppose engineering as well. Lots of engineers who like to talk about daylight and air make some very good input into this conversation, touching on the physical impact that the workplace has on our skin or on our eyes, so it's a real thing. The books that interest me, kind of to pick on that are come from more the psychology end. So there's one in particular that comes to mind. It's probably not very helpful to you, Laurie. But it's a psychologist of the 60s, French, called Guy Debord, and it's about psychogeography and the idea that you form a kind of emotional association with particular places and spaces. So both externally in a city, but also in a building. And that bond makes you want to go back to them. And that's where you do your best work. That's the kind of, so he coined the term dérive, which is in French is kind of to wander. So the idea that a bit, not almost the opposite of what Hani was saying, is that you're not trying to work out your cockpit so that everything is in the right place. You're allowing people to feel their way through an environment that has a number of things, some of which may truly appeal, and with including spaces and pieces of furniture. You'd be amazed how attached people get to their office chair if they find a good one. That kind of attachment, and so this is a book called I think it's called Psychogeography, and I'm sorry, it's 1968. It's very, very old. But I would highly recommend it. It's a good read. And in fact, I believe that Google Maps in its original version was inspired by it to form its navigational structure. So emoticons and all of that come from that. And the reason I like it is because one of the things that we're talking about here is can space trigger a behavior or an emotion or a reaction? Can you design space so that it does? And in order to unravel that, you need to figure out how it happens, and how it happens for different people. So I imagine the advantage of the cockpit is that the pilot will have been vetted and filtered and be of a stable personality. I assume.
One would hope so.
But not all. Yeah, well, exactly. Not, sorry. That's it. I'll shut up on that.
Brilliant. So it is about pulling from different resources as far as text. And somebody mentioned that there might be a gap in the market, Giuseppe, because there's not a book there currently. So just some ideas. And Danielle, you had a question.
Yes, I was just grappling for mute there. It was just about, I mean, there's obviously lots of people on this call who are interested in this topic, and I'm kind of curious to what extent businesses are kind of proactively seeking this versus somebody needing to tell them that this is something that is needed for not necessarily how their workplace looks, but how it functions for people. So I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I don't want to hug. Do you want? So does somebody want to step in? I have an answer for that.
I'll take it and then come back to you, Giuseppe, if you don't mind. Danielle, the answer is that it's leader led, right? We tend to see people who have gone through the process before and had success, wanting to find out more insight, and therefore putting more into everything: leadership, culture, the office design, all the elements that we talked about on this call. And really championing that, and they really do have to champion it, right? They're spending a lot of time convincing other board members or other leaders that that's the right thing to invest in, time and money. And so, in part, my answer is you need a champion who's already seen it. If you are selling it per se, whether it's internally or externally, it's very hard to sell. Hey, let's spend loads of time and money on finding out what we should do, because if a leader hasn't seen it and felt it, they are disinclined to do so. On the flip side, I think there's an awful lot of leaders, and it relates to the question about remote working, working from home, who still have their heads buried in the sand. They know that opening that can of worms is such a big topic, big enough to change entire target operating models, constructs of company constructs and all the rest of it. And they're just not prepared to do that. Few are prepared to do that. And so they sort of skirt around the edges, doing a little bit here and there. My big message, and to finish off, I hand over to Giuseppe on that, is I see positivity though. I see people wanting to find out what they should be doing. They seek the right answers, but they're not necessarily prepared to put all the investment in to get them.
Nice. So not all who wander are lost, as Tolkien said. But I read it on Facebook, so I know it's true. So, Hani, over to you.
In agreement with Christopher, but sadly, I answered Daniel before. I'm sure Giuseppe will come in, maybe support or not on this, but there's very few that are really being evidence-led in their design. So start by the culture you want, then really the environment, the space, everything should be about the culture that you're really trying to drive, because the space and the environment should be supercharging behaviors you want to see. And that's got to be evidence-led. Sadly, it's the other way around sometimes, which doesn't always help because you're not designing something based on logic. and data. The final thing I'll tell you is I think the world is still grappling. I mean, we mentioned that interesting word like hybrid working. We are in a world, whether we like it or not. And I don't want to recite the past, but we've ended up all being through the COVID era, which was fascinating for as much as it had horrid outcomes. I'm sure you'd all agree. But the flip side of that, we were all presented with a challenge, like the world is egalitarian. It threw the same challenge to everybody in the world at the same time. And it's like the world telling us you have to think about how you work, change your habits, change what you do. And we did rise to the challenge as mankind. And actually, people who always said impossible that we can have hybrid working, impossible that people could achieve things from sitting at home, impossible that, I'll keep going on. But actually, it was possible. We did carry on. We prevailed. We were performing. We were doing well. In fact, probably a lot of argument why people said performance went up. People started caring for each other a lot more. It's all dying away again. And hybrid working does bring a challenge to office design. It's not a challenge that's expensive, that's different. So as an example is, nobody needs to have their own chair, their own desk, their own space area. The work is mobile, it's all in the cloud. That means that for the hybrid working, you need to have places that they can go to. And I go back to my design. Is it a quiet space they need today? Collaborative space, noisy space? And they go in to an office for a purpose. And now we have to think about what are the behaviors we want to see when they're there, and what is the purpose that they're there in the office with in this collaborative, in this hybrid working. So we still haven't answered that. Maybe one or two, roughly, I can think of maybe I've answered to that. Some resisted it and they just like, no, you all have to come back. It's just crazy. We're not thinking about that, and we kind of try and answer it, but we know it's there to prevail. So I'll leave it at that. Perhaps Giuseppe will add more to that.
Giuseppe, you're on mute.
Yeah. A lot of it is to do, I understand from Nikita, I don't know whether that's correct or not, that a lot of you on the call may be representing the HR function of companies, or in any case, when we talk about workplace, it tends to fall in within the remit of one of two categories. Eventually, I mean, we've talked about the leader, but behind the leader or supporting the leader are a group of people with a certain culture and an approach and experience of having carried out a workplace project. If we're talking about a new project, even if we're talking about a transformation, those kind of people are either facility people, so they are about the infrastructure, the walls, the ceiling, the air conditioning, the desk, and that is generally that behind that comes a lifetime of pain, delivering difficult projects that go wrong, and every single project goes wrong. And on the other hand, you have a HR leader whose focus is increasingly the welfare, the well-being of the people, their ability to work effectively, contribute effectively, develop a career. And in that context, workplace is it's not secondary, but its goal is to achieve that aspect of things. Whereas in the facility world, it's actually to meet a standard, which is generally a building standard. Company like McKinsey has books of standards that relate to all of their offices in the world. If you were to take a facility approach, a golden standard project would meet all of those criteria, but would it be good for the people? I've noticed over the past 10, 15 years, this big shift from one to the other. And I noticed, to answer your question, Danielle, that if the conversation is about people, the interest in the workplace is greater. It's also less about the cost of or the type of laminate finish you might have at the desk, or the polished brass on the door handle, but it's more about the overall overarching aim, which is to bring together an organization, wherever it may be. Also much easier for leaders to input into it, and much easier for the dialogue that Chris was referring to take place, because it's less about things, bits and pieces. Now, that doesn't mean that the bits and pieces don't affect, and there is an interaction, but your conversation isn't about that. One of the things when Nikita and I have had workplace design projects together, and we ask an audience, we do a workshop, we ask, what is your favorite place? Where do you like working? How does it feel? What's a good experience? What's a bad experience? I mean, standard question. But I always remember one. I asked a law firm in Bath where most of the people thought that the bourbon biscuits, the particular bourbon biscuits that they bought locally, were the key reason why they stayed within the organization, and they were the kind of linchpin, the keystone of organizational culture. And if we did anything, we must not get rid of the biscuit, or in fact, do something about having more or a variety of them, which told you something in an indirect way, and it made you think about, I don't know, it made you think about the custard creams, absolutely. It made you think that there were other things alongside the facility bits and pieces. So does that, Danielle, does that help answer? Okay, that's my answer. Yeah.
Thank you.
I love that example of the biscuit. Preempted anybody telling me I'm on mute, though. That is so satisfactory.
Yeah, we love to hear you squirm or not.
No, it depends. So we have time for one more question, then final remarks, and we'll wrap up for the day. Any questions, good people? Oh, somebody just messaged me in direct message. Harleen, would you mind unmuting yourself? Oh, you're on the move. Okay, Harleen, you'll need to hear more of me, I'm afraid, Giuseppe. Do you think we should also focus on designing virtual workplaces more effectively? With the rise of virtual worlds, it seems like this will become increasingly important.
Totally. Absolutely. It's happening. It's been happening in a major way. We did a project again with McKinsey. I've done it with others where you design. So this was a very cool thing. We used the platform that was used for education to create a virtual office. Because it's virtual, you can build waterfalls, 100-story towers, jungles. It could be anything at all. And then people would meet as avatars. So you can also become another person, have chat with basically, it becomes, a whole other way of being. It's a game. It's game based, right? Largely. But so the idea that because it's virtual, it's the difference between apples and Microsoft products. The idea is because it's virtual, the digital, the interface, it doesn't matter. It's totally wrong, of course, and you need to, people as we do now immerse themselves in an environment that they see and hear, smell one day, perhaps that's already happening. It is happening, but the trend, of course, and I noticed some people on the chat asking, what are some of the trends, is to try and desperately hang on to the physical contact that we do have within work, because it's seen as important and beneficial and part of what makes us human. And I suppose COVID has not taken that away. On the contrary, has reinforced that sense that we must be, physically united. So hence, many companies reinstating the need or the obligation even to be physically at work. So, but the fact that the virtual design environment exists alongside doesn't mean that it shouldn't be designed. And I think what's more interesting as well, including virtual reality, augmented reality environments, the two will eventually blur and blend. So they're not going to be two separate things, but you might well be in an environment. I've been in a meeting with a hologram, a number of real people, and then a hologram person who was in San Francisco. Amazing thing. Actually, kind of things you see in movies. It was a Cisco, and it was a test, but it was incredible, and it made you think it could definitely be. So a gimmick perhaps at this stage, but definitely something I can see happening, and we should be designing for.
Excellent. So you can be working from home and a hologram in the office. So you can be 5 days a week in the office while being a hologram. I think there is a market there. Perfect. Thank you, Giuseppe, on that brave new world comment. Christopher, Hani, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen similar things. I think I was in part of a discussion group just the other week on this very topic, because this whole return to office debate still goes on, and I understand why, because we do need to get together with each other, and we must have a space where we can do this. But that doesn't mean that we have to have our own office for that, and it certainly doesn't mean we need to have a big one. I do see, with technology coming on board, this sort of virtual workplace, and I agree with Giuseppe, the sort of hologram avatar. And you can start to see basic versions of this already, that you feel like it's life size, right? So it's not like you're just looking at your head and shoulders like we are now. You're seeing everything, my shorts, my trainers, my body posture, everything, my background. In reality, it is very, very lifelike, to the point where, unless we're doing something physically interactive, like a physical design with stuff like bricklaying or something, then it's not much different to being in the office for most of the time. And therefore, it's about being intentional about how we need the office. And here's the leadership challenge, right? And it will be later as it is now. You want to get people together. Do they all come together at the same time? If not, what's the point in being together? Because which ones do need to interact with each other? So we need to right size our teams. But more importantly, how do I provide a space for only the odd day and pay for it for the rest of the week? Nobody wants to do that unless you hire out a space, like the gentleman mentioned earlier, to use on a regular basis. But then it's not yours, and many organizations have security and cyber issues. So there's some real challenges there. All I'd say is I think the future of much professional-based work, not hands-on work, which is what 40% of the population, this sort of hologram type stuff, is definitely coming in, and it will be a benefit to us. There is no doubt about it. It will make that working from home better than it is now, but we need to be more intentional about when and how we do that.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So it is about intention and leadership and how we go about it. And Hani, what are your closing remarks for today's session?
Yeah. I think listening to particularly the challenges around virtual environments, whether be it virtual because you're collaborating online, or virtual because it's a virtual space that anybody can come and visit to collaborate. I find that a fascinating one. And all what I would say to it is, if we are going to go there for certain organizations, as Christopher already stipulated, Giuseppe, it's about the why we're doing so. So I always argue about a business that wants to do that, an organization of any sort, of any size, is it going to help you because it opens up your talent pool? And talent pool is a big discussion. If you think about it, you can, instead of putting walls around your people, if you break down the wall, and that means that I could get experts from right around the world that could join my company, could work with me to help me design or do great things, that deliver clients, that deliver products, whatever it might be, then that is surely a great thing to do, because you don't need to they're not having to be physically there to as because lay bricks down. So that becomes a purpose that is quite important, to make either a virtual environment that they could sometimes come in, or even make sure that we are driving a virtual workspace online in the cloud or whatever, where people can collaborate. The challenge always there, it's not a challenge actually, the interesting discussion there is that how do you drive your culture traits through behaviors? Because it's not just about, sometimes, as we know, people could be great at the job they do, but destroy your culture, and you want both. and I say that challenge is not different if I go back to the airline industry from saying you could resonate your culture for people who are never office-based. If you think about, if you're running an airline, you know, maybe 80% of your people are on the move. They're around the world. They're pilots and cabin crew and staff who book you in and so on. So how on earth can you, and that industry has been resonating their culture and make sure that everybody, you know, all the employees enact the culture, the intended culture, what they are traveling and running around the world. So there are ways which are outside the roles that probably we can talk about here of how you could do that. But it's just got to be with purpose, with design, with data, with evidence. Like, why are we doing those things? It's not because they are fashionable, because they are important to driving the outcomes that we want out of our culture. Leave it at that.
Fantastic. Thank you, Hani. Thank you, Giuseppe and Chris. And I would just love to hear from one or two of you wonderful guests of what your takeaways from today. In no particular order, Saba, Rhiannon, what are your thoughts? Mhm. Richard, thank you.
I'll help you out there, Nikita. I'm really interested in this online hologram idea. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. Is there any more information on how Cisco managed to pull that off? Does the person who's at home, do they have to be standing up and moving around, or can they be sat in a chair? Does the chair have to be green? How does it work where they join the meeting? Can you have it where you have a few people meeting in a room, and then one person who's joined that room and they're hologrammed in? Do they need a projector for that? Do they need to create a space for them? How does that work?
Right. So there is a lot of technology around it. And all of those, most of the answers to those questions is yes, multiple cameras, special setup either end. I can't actually, if I can find it, I'll send you what I have of it. It's now this is also a few years old, so it may well, I'm sure it has evolved since. It may even be better than what it was, but it was very, very impressive. And the thing that was glitching was the sound. They were working on that, and hardly any delay, so that was very impressive because you would have expected that. And so this is, but yes, because it was a pilot and a test, it was done in a way that was in test environment situation. So I don't know to what extent this would have been easily replicated in a real office, but these were two bespoke rooms for testing this particular technology. But
you can find quite a lot on Google if you go to holographic displays and holographs in the office. There's plenty of it. Yeah, I mean, that will definitely bridge the 5 days
trending.
office. Perfect. Done. Perfect. Anybody else cares? Any final questions? Any reflection? Meda, Clara, Marie, Christine? You can unmute yourself and just share with us your thoughts. Aurora? Harleen? Yeah. Oh, thinking about the nearest exit before people turn into holograms. Yeah. 5 years ago, yes, there's a lot of interesting stuff happening. But what's also interesting is that we all have stayed on this call for 1.5 hours on a sunny day. So it's clearly attracting some interest. So I just want to give a big thanks to our wonderful speakers and our brilliant guests and participants today. So as previously mentioned, the session has been recorded. It will be whacked onto YouTube a little bit later. So next time you want to catch up, you can. We have quite a few next events scheduled as well, so you can see them on my LinkedIn. This is one of them. So we will be talking about moving from employee engagement to culture analytics. So that's going to be fun on the 15th. And if you're in 15th in London town, we will have the next SciPub about AI and assessments. We have Georgi coming down from US, and that's going to be really fun in more ways than one. So, as well as having two wonderful other speakers. So good people, thank you everyone for joining. Brilliant. It will be uploaded to YouTube. Hopefully see you at one of our next events. And thank you.
Thank you, Nikita.
Thank you, Nikita.
Thank you, everyone.